Hey, welcome to our session today. My name is Tony Saldana, and I'm absolutely delighted to share with you my personal experiences and a very important key message that digital transformation is absolutely crucial to ESG. And I'm going to draw from my own experiences. I had the privilege of working at Procter Gamble for 27 years. I ran global IT and global business services or shared services in all the regions of the world there. This was a $2.5 billion organization. And more importantly, I had the opportunity to drive digital transformation, although P&G's IT and global business services or GBS was widely acknowledged to be best in class. And that's the key. How do you drive disruptive change given a disruptive problem? And that's what ESG is. So let me share a little bit about my story and also my lessons when it comes to ESG. So about 5 or 6 years ago at Procter & Gamble, I started to question whether, all of this good news that we were best in class was really, any value. Because the real competition for many companies, including large ones, is the startup. It is not other big companies. So I reached out to 100 different organizational leaders, whether they're startups or venture capitalists or consultants or peer organizations. And among those was this person, AJ Brustein, who was the CEO of a small startup. And you see the email exchange between AJ and myself. And on April 10th, I basically said, yeah, I would love to meet, but I'm out next week. And then AJ said, yeah, fine, I'll have my Amy, who I assumed was his admin, to schedule. And then Amy came out and gave all of those options on when to meet. And you may wonder, this is a boring story. Why are you telling us this? Except for the fact that Amy is a robot. So I want you to look at that message again. There is nothing in there that gives you the slightest idea that we were talking to a robot. When I say on April 10th, I'm out next week, none of the options which Amy generates were in that period when I'm out. I learned a very important lesson there. In large companies, we wait for the technology to be ready. Artificial intelligence is going to take a long time before it replaces an admin assistant. In smaller companies, they go after use cases. So the use case of calendaring, which is what admin assistants do, among other things, is ready. And it is being adopted, and it was adopted many years ago. So this is just one insight into how you can digitally disrupt entire organizations. That is the core of what I think we can do with ESG. And just to share examples of the kind of stuff we disrupted at P&G, each of those pictures there, 20 or 25 of them, is a use case. It is a $50 million size of prize, $50 million benefit. It is a 10x, it is 10 times better than the best solution available in the world. And it goes across the spectrum from top left, end-to-end supply chain planning. Finally, can we do real-time supply chain planning from suppliers to customers? And we did that, and we proved that it is possible. Or my favorite, which is the next one up there, which is travel and expense. Can we finally end the creation of travel and expense reports in our companies and the entire processing and checking? We can use data. We can use artificial intelligence. Once you spend some money on travel, a system can auto-generate a travel and expense report. It can validate every spend. And there are many other examples that you can see there, from master data. We actually had some use cases even in legal, and we certainly had many use cases in advertising and in finance and in IT and so on and so forth. But all of this just to kind of bring home an important lesson. You can digitally disrupt, even in very large, stable organizations. Now, bringing us back to ESG, nobody in their right minds questions whether climate change is real. You see the pictures out there of Pakistan, and you know that the US and in many other countries, this has been the hottest summer since climate was being recorded. Of course, there are many people that claim to deny climate change because it is in their interest to deny it. But the data is there. There is absolutely no issue. And if you don't believe me, let me share with you some examples. There have been studies done that demonstrate that GDP per capita is going to decline tremendously by 2100 if we don't take action. So in Mexico, it's going to decline by more than 70%. In the US, it's going to be less, less in terms of what it could be, by more than 30%, and so on and so forth. Of course, you have the case of Canada up there that actually may benefit from climate change because it kind of moderates their weather. But the vast majority of the countries, this is going to bring a huge economic disaster. And of course, on top of that is the human disaster, the billions of work hours lost, as you can see out there, or the number of deaths, and the people displaced. This is recorded, it is known. In fact, this economic challenge is not just the only reason why companies or countries or organizations should have an ESG policy. Studies have demonstrated that companies with higher ESG scores actually lower their cost of capital by 10%. So it is actually a financial strategy, not just a feel-good strategy for the earth. Customers are requiring it. Shareholders are requiring it. Financiers are requiring it. Which of course leads us with the question, which is, if this is a no-brainer, why aren't more companies actively being successful in their ESG strategy? Which brings me to the next important insight. The reason why you're not seeing more of this is ESG is a disruptive change. And established organizations hate disruptive change. Well, think about it a little more. Most companies or organizations or countries that are successful in the longer term, they avoid crazy changes in strategy, right? They have to keep an even keel. What that means is that they have to, of course, change, but not change in a disruptive manner. And that becomes an issue when you're faced with something like ESG, where small incremental change is not sufficient. It has to become a disruptive change, which leads us to the question on how are you going to do this, right? Which is what we're going to talk about in the next of the session here today. We know that ESG is a disruptive change. We know that digital transformation is a disruptive change. Why not fight disruption with disruption? Why not fight fire with fire? And that's what we need to do. This is what we're going to do. And by the way, this is not just me or Alex and Juan and logistics that is talking about this. This is the United Nations. The United Nations Environment Program has a sub-program under digital transformation, because they have done the data and they have figured out that this is the best way to drive ESG. You can see some of the numbers, carbon reduction, increase in natural resources and stuff like that. That can be had if you drive digital transformation as a strategy. Which of course still brings us back to the same question of how. We'd all love to do that. But we know this is hard. Organizations don't like disruption. Is there a way to do this successfully? Which takes me back to my Procter & Gamble examples. Yes, you can drive digital transformation. Yes, you can drive disruptive change, but your approach has to be different than regular change. Here are 3 recommendations. 1, for ESG, you have to reframe the issue. This is not a question of normal change. This is a question of disruptive change. And it needs to be recognized as a priority, as a disruptive priority. The second is you are going to have to reimagine your business model. You may have to create new products and services or new ways to go to market. You are going to have to reimagine your entire business. And then the third, which you can see up there, is you're going to have to change or reposition reward systems. Existing reward systems, as I said, favor small incremental change. They don't favor disruptive change. Now, let's get a little deeper into each of these three items. So in the first one, which is you're going to have to reframe the issue. There have been studies that were done at Harvard and many other places that said companies that follow a three-part strategy, in this particular case, 70-20-10, which is 70% of resources on day-to-day running of the business, 20% on continuous improvement, and 10% on disruption, they actually deliver more Wall Street shareholder value than companies that just follow a two-part strategy. The two-part strategy, which is what MBA schools still teach, is you run your business and you drive continuous improvement. But that doesn't work in a disruptive world. This is an approach which Google has used very effectively since the early 2000s. This is the same approach that I used at Procter & Gamble. Recognize that ESG or digital transformation or both is a disruptive change, and you're going to have to use different methodologies for that part of your operation, for that 10% of your operation, right? The mistake you want to avoid is to think of ESG as either the 70 or the 20. This is the challenge in organizations that don't make progress. They delay it. They say, the technology is not ready or the capabilities are not ready. We're going to come back to that later. Or they make the other mistake, which is they go on the other side and say, we're going to pledge something, but they don't have plans behind it. Or the worst of all of these is greenwashing. This is something that at COP27 in Egypt, global leaders are pointing this out as a criminal sin. Because if you just do your day-to-day stuff and then you greenwash it, you say, no. We are actively driving ESG. You may fool some people in the short term, but you will cause immense damage to your company or your country if you do that. So these are the things. Don't treat ESG as if it was a 70 or a 20 activity. Use the disciplines and methodologies and organization management of the 10, right? And that's the first suggestion. The second is that you may actually have to reimagine your entire business model. So let me share some examples of what that looks like, both from my own experience at P&G, but then also from examples that have been published by the United Nations. So, you guys remember the complex chart with the 20 pictures from Procter & Gamble that I shared. One of those cases was, how do you use artificial intelligence for deductions and claims and disputes resolution with suppliers? So just to explain this, if you're a large company like P&G and you ship $100 worth of products to a customer, let's say Walmart, but sometimes you get paid only 90, the remaining 10 becomes a dispute, right? And then there are hundreds of people in large companies, like Walmart or P&G, that are required to resolve this, and lots of paperwork and lots of losses. And there are billions of dollars that are held up in disputes. So the disruptive transformation, digital transformation, was I found a startup in Silicon Valley that specialized in artificial intelligence algorithms for disputes. And we helped develop that in a small way, in an iterative, fast-changing way, so that eventually when it was done, whenever a dispute came in, we could tell with 90% accuracy whether this was real or not. You did not have to have armies of people from Walmart and P&G spend days or months resolving this. This is possible, and that's the key message in this case. You can drive operational efficiency using transformational ideas and technologies. Maybe a closer one to ESG is, is the use of blockchain for import and export. Now, again, large multinational companies will import and export raw materials and finished goods. And this can be wasteful to the extent that there are a lot of people and parties involved and a lot of data issues. So, for example, if you are a Procter and Gamble and you are buying raw material from a supplier in Vietnam, the goods pass through local transport in Vietnam to, customs authorities in Vietnam ports to shipping companies like Maersk Shipping to, delays and demurrages and storage. And then maybe the arrival in New York, again, customs, again, transportation, and so on and so forth. There are literally, for large companies, billions of dollars of losses as a result of this, not to mention environmental change, environmental impact due to, obviously good storage and, extra weight and, materials being lost and, so on and so forth. So at that time, IBM and Maersk Shipping had created a blockchain whereby all of the parties, customs, freight forwarders, shippers, suppliers, customers could put their transactions on there. Our contribution was to go in there and say, hey, if this is the case, why are we wasting paper by having these suppliers generate invoices and our people generating more paper in order to examine and pay those invoices? If we all believe that the blockchain has the right data, I will auto pay whenever I receive the goods based on all of the data, including maybe fees and damages and stuff like that. I would just generate a payment. Great for the environment, great for the speed of operation, win-win. But again, these were, digital transformation stories from Procter & Gamble. Now let's look at ESG stories as have been acknowledged globally. The first one I'd like to share with you is the story of Airbus. Airbus has been 3D printing parts. And it's great because not only do you eliminate the carbon footprint of actually shipping those parts from suppliers to the plane, but also you can use lower costs and you involve lower costs and you use better natural materials to do this. Again, a great win story for ESG driven by digital transformation. Another example is Michelin, the tire company. So several years ago, Michelin said, we want to go from the business of only providing trucking companies with tires management and tire maintenance, and to provide them with fuel efficiency as a service. So they take all of the data from the tire management systems, from the individual tires and from the climate and from the truck's driving habits, and they use algorithms to commit to fuel efficiency. That's an example. They changed their business model. They are no longer just a tire management or tire manufacturing company. They are a fuel efficiency company. Another example, BMW. Several years ago, BMW introduced Drive Now, which is like an Uber or Lyft type of a service, but of course with higher end cars like BMWs. Again, a great example, you have to change your business model. You can provide not just physical vehicles, but you can provide the higher order need, which is transportation. And that's what BMW and others have done. It is possible. Another example, General Electric, for their wind farms, they use artificial intelligence to manufacture the best engines as well as maintain the best engines. So, for example, if you're going to lay out a wind farm, in the middle of Nevada, they would study the area and optimize those engines to that specific landscape and the wind patterns. On top of that, after installation, they would get all of the data from the sensors and then fine-tune every engine's operation so that it maximizes its impact. Great story in ESG and a great story on what technology and data can do. And of course, the final story of Monsanto, now Bayer, which has been providing data to farmers so that they know exactly when to plant the crop, how much to water, when to use weed control, when to harvest it, all using climate data, data from soil, data from the farmers. Again, a huge change in business model to go from being a seed selling company to being a data company, right? So you can see, based on all of these, that digital transformation is possible. It is difficult unless you follow a different methodology, a different approach. And one of those is you have to reimagine your business model. And then the final recommendation is, you have to rework your reward systems. I love this particular chart, which is called Martek's law. And what it says is that technology changes exponentially, but organizations change logarithmically. I mean, it's actually worse than linear, because in logarithmic, it flattens over time. So unless you change the reward systems to close the gap between technology and your organization, that gap is going to get worse over time. You have to reward your people to start thinking differently and to be open to disruptive change, as long as that disruptive change is not crazy risk-taking. It uses a methodology which has been created using the 70-20-10 to drive very measured and acceptable change within any small period of time. Reward systems are absolutely critical if you're going to drive digital transformation. And a lot of this is laid out in my book, Why Digital Transformation Fails, because I provide a checklist on how to do this, how to accept disruption without, taking crazy risks. I know it is possible. I have actually had the opportunity to drive that and to help many Fortune 500 companies drive disruptive change within their companies. And as legal officers and CEOs and CXOs of your companies, I want to urge you, please consider ESG as a disruptive change. Don't try and implement it using the same operational processes as you do for any normal change. Approach it in a disciplined manner, as if this was a disruptive change. There is a methodology. It can be done. You can be successful. And I'm sure that if you follow that, you guys will be creating the next set of success stories to inspire the rest of the world. All the best as you go through this journey.